This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Thank you very much for bearing with us, especially with the heat that our conversation has generated. Conversations about unjust racial hierarchy are apt to do such a thing. We have one final speaker for today. There are two other speakers, well, three in fact, tomorrow, so please do come back tomorrow. And after Dr. Nicholas Kwesi Tsri, we have a reception for you, which will be out in the dressing room. So please enjoy that with us before you leave for this evening. Dr. Nicholas Kwesi Tsri obtained a PhD in Equality Studies from the School of Social Justice in University College Dublin in 2013. The title of his PhD thesis is Africans Are Not Black, the Case for Conceptual Liberation. He has two MA degrees, one in Ethics and Morality from Université Marc Bloch, Strasbourg, and one in Translation Studies from Dublin City University, and two BA degrees, one in Philosophy and another in Anthropology and Theology. He is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Equality Studies Department in the School of Social Justice in University College, Dublin, where he facilitates tutorials on the undergraduate modules on global justice and social justice movements. Also, he's been contributing to a number of postgraduate modules on the MSc in Equality Studies, delivering lectures on anti-African racism, racism, feminism, equality and inequality, and language and identity. His book proposal, Africans Are Not Black, the Case for Conceptual Liberation, has been submitted to a publisher and is currently under review. Dr. Nicholas Kwesi Tsri.
Okay, before I start, I would like to thank Nathaniel for inviting me to this conference. Also to thank him for organizing this. I think it is important that we talk about these issues because we take a lot for granted. So I'm happy to be here and thank you for inviting me. My presentation is an overview of my PhD, which I submitted and defended in 2013. I am interested in the role played by language in sustaining anti-African racism and other forms of racism. In my PhD, I examined this through an analysis of the concept black as it has been applied to Africans and people of African descent. Now let me look at my argument. I argue that the term black is used to symbolize evil. What is objectionable and many other negative qualities. The same term black is used to describe and categorize Africans. This dehumanizes and denigrates Africans and contributes to anti-African racism. I argue therefore that we should abandon the use of the term black to categorize Africans. Now I'll look at the outline of my presentation. First, I'll talk about the research question. Second, I'll highlight the main findings of my literature review. Third, I'll discuss the frameworks I used in my analysis. And fourth, I'll touch on the primary text that I've analyzed. I analyzed Othello, the Ewe Bible. I'm from Ghana and my mother tongue is Ewe, so I'll analyze the Bible. And finally, I'll look at a book by a Ghanaian author, how these black and white things were used by Africans. Finally, I will advance the central argument for the abandonment of the use of the term black to describe and categorize Africans. I did my research in the context of equality, so my research question was, does equality require the abandonment of the term black to categorize people? And I have other subsidiary questions as well. Historical. When did Europeans start using the term black for Africans? And when did they start using it symbolically? And have these two uses changed significantly over time? I also have conceptual questions. What is the symbolic meaning of black? What is the categorical meaning of black? What is the full theory of the categorical use of the word black? And how is this related to the symbolic meaning? What is the relationship between calling Africans as black and using black to denote objectionable qualities? This brings to mind a question raised by Richard Dyer in relation to the concept of whiteness. And I quote him. He said, "White people are not literally or symbolically white, yet they are called white. What does this mean?" So this logic informs the analysis of the concept black. If we call people black, what do we mean? What are we talking about? If we homogenize a group of people and call them black, what do we mean? And I also have textual questions. How is black used symbolically and categorically in texts that have continuing importance in the cultures of both Europe and its former colonies? And finally, I have normative questions. Should we abandon or conserve the categorical use of the term black? Should we abandon or conserve its symbolic use? So these are the questions that informed my analysis of the concept black. I have been talking about the question of racism, so here I will attempt and define what I look as racism in this context. So I said, I characterize anti-African racism in this context as the use of black and white to create different human categories and the distribution of moral values based on the symbolisms of black and white. In other words, the marking of Africans as black is another way of presenting them as lacking. It's a negation of the positive moral qualities possessed by those who labeled themselves as white. So to mark someone black, you are negating the person, the humanity of the person. Is black is a negation of whiteness. So that's my definition of what I'm trying to talk about. And I continue that this systematic attempt to rationalize the division of human beings into black and white groups based on presumed moral and physical characteristics have also played a central role in justifying structural inequality. Because when you are labeled black, the assumption is that you lack something, so you have to be treated differently. I attempted to demonstrate in my thesis how the concepts of inferiority and superiority manifest themselves when the symbolisms of blackness are used to homogenize and construct the peoples of Africa as inferior human group, and at the same time as the symbolisms of whiteness are used to create Europeans as a superior human group. So these categories, their essence, their moral values derive from the symbolisms of black and white. I argue that anti-African racism happens in the context of the use of the term black to categorize Africans. However, I am not saying that anti-African racism does not happen outside the context of the descriptive and the categorical use of black. So there are other forms of racism. So I am just identifying an aspect and analyzing it. I'll now look at the main findings of my literature review. I started my research by tracing the genesis and evolution of the use of the term black to describe and categorize Africans. I did this by contextualizing the research historically by reviewing research relevant to the symbolic and categorical use of black and white in classical antiquity. This period is significant for understanding the origins of the phenomenon of anti-African racism because European semantic and conceptual structures are largely influenced by semantic and conceptual structures of classical antiquity. What the historical evidence shows is that in classical antiquity, the term black was embedded with negative qualities and used to symbolize evil, fear, sorrow, inferiority, and to characterize what is objectionable. It was also used to symbolize the underworld, and the god of the underworld was called the Black One. And deities with bad character and ill omens were all described as black. Furthermore, the evidence from this exercise indicates that classical writers, particularly Greeks, were the first to use the name Ethiopia, which meant burnt face, and the term black interchangeably for Africans. For instance, the first recorded evidence of Africans in Greek literature was attributed to Homer, who used the term Ethiopia, burnt face, to describe Africans. Also, Ptolemy described them as deeply black and pure Ethiopians. And again, by the time of Xenophanes, Ethiopians were identified a bit more precisely as black with negroid, flat noses, and woolly hair. So here we are seeing the incorporation of biological features into the concept of blackness. So they are moving from ascription of color to identify those colors with certain identifiable features. In addition, the evidence indicates that a strong relationship was established between the negative symbolisms of blackness and the identity of those who were categorized as black. For example, they were characterized as savages with natural tendency to evil, harbingers of bad luck, ill omen, and disaster, and also as backward barbarians addicted to horrid practices. So this is a relationship established between calling someone black and associating the person with the negative symbolisms of blackness. Thus, I drew this conclusion that the use of black to describe and categorize was more than just the creation of differences. In many cases, there were moral and other implications involved beyond the mere fact of the contrast they were supposed to mark. Here I have to say that although I'm focusing on blackness, I'm also talking about whiteness, where it helps to illuminate the concept of blackness. So I will be referring to the concept of whiteness, but I will not pay attention to it as such. In my analysis, I distinguished between the symbolic use of black and the categorical use of black. By categorical, I mean the use of black to classify people as a particular type, and the use of white to classify people as a particular type, and to maintain a relationship between the symbolisms and the categorical use. I proceeded to analyze the use of this concept in the Middle Ages because the end of classical antiquity witnessed the emergence of the Middle Ages, and for that matter, Christianity. So what I did is was to find out how Christianity dealt with ideas about Africans. Were there continuation, were there discontinuities, or did they continue with this classical definition of Africans? I explored the symbolic and categorical use of black and white in Christianity, both in the Bible and in the early Christian exegetical literature. The evidence shows that, let me explain, exegesis is the commentary exegetes make on the Bible because they were skilled in the interpretation of the Bible. So they do this interpretation to explain to Christians what the context of the Bible means, the semantic context of the words used in the Bible and the context in which they are used. So in essence, they are trying to explain to believers, early Christian believers, what the Bible contains and what it does not contain. So that is the work of the exegetes. So the evidence from this analysis, particularly from the Bible, I focus on the Bible because the Bible was part of the colonial project. And also because the concept black and white were used in the Bible both symbolically and categorically. So here I'm trying to analyze how early Christians continue or discontinue the behavior of Greco-Roman writers and theorists. In the Bible, black is used extensively to symbolize both negative and socially undesirable qualities, including sin, evil, curse, and malevolence. For instance, Job believed he was cursed by God and exclaimed, "My skin is black upon me." Also, black is used to express God's curse and punishment on those who disobey his rules. Again, it is used to describe bad omen in the form of a black raw horse. So this is the symbolic use of black in the Bible. And how is it used for human appearance? For example, Job, the same case applies to Job's case because he described himself as black and also invokes the idea that he was a sinner, that is why he became black. In another example, a woman described herself as black, and I quote, "I am black but beautiful. O you daughters of Jerusalem, look not upon me because I am black." This particular sentence is important because this lady is trying to establish oppositional relationship between being black and being beautiful. I am black but beautiful. I will now touch on the use of the term Ethiopian in the Bible. As we've seen earlier, the term Ethiopian was begun by the early Greeks. So I want to see how this term was used in the Bible. For example, a reference to the skin of Ethiopia and evil in the same context. So here we are seeing the authors of the Bible using the term Ethiopia and the concept of sin in the same context. And I quote, "Can the Ethiopian change his skin, or the leopard his spot? Then may he also do good that are accustomed to do evil." So here we see a repetition of the behavior of early Greeks who used the term Ethiopian for Africans and associated Africans with evil. Also, in another context, an Ethiopian is rejected as a suitable partner in marriage. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. Here, according to some theories, the rejection was based on the fact that the Ethiopian woman was perceived to be evil, and as such, her relationship with Moses was seen as against the will of God. Again, the Bible further reveals a series of violent acts directed at Ethiopians by God because of their association with evil and sin. For example, messengers shall make the careless Ethiopians afraid. Great pain shall come upon them. Again, anguish shall be in Ethiopia. Ye Ethiopians also, ye shall be slain by my sword. So this is God directing violence against those who are characterized as Ethiopians. In essence, the Bible also employs Ethiopian as a synonym for the categorical use of black and relates it to the sin, the concept of sin and evil. So we see the writers of the Bible continuing of this classical practice of calling people black Ethiopians and associating them with evil, sin, and what is socially objectionable. So now I'll now look at how Christian exegetes use the term black and Ethiopian. Black is used to symbolize Satan, demons, and evil in the following texts. For example, in the late 1st century text, Epistles of Barnabas, Satan is referred to as the Black One. Also, in the Acts of Peter, Satan is presented as a black and as an enemy of Christ. Again, in an early Christian text entitled The Life of Millennia the Younger, the devil reportedly changed into a young black man and was misleading Christian women. So yet we see the association that is being established with the concept of black and the idea of evil and sin. I think what is happening here is these writers are trying to communicate a representation in the form of human, how the devil looks like. As one writer said, the demon is Ethiopianized and Ethiopians were demonized. So these were the language they were using to communicate the Christian message to their followers. So let us now look at the use of black together with the term Ethiopian in early Christian discourse, origin. So now I'll focus on some of the important exegesis in early Christianity. At one time, we were Ethiopians in our vices and sin. How so? Because our sins had blackened us. So here he is establishing a relationship between black and sin. And Augustine, all people are black like Ethiopians until they find salvation in Christ. So here he's trying to suggest that once you are black, you are a sinner. And you have to make that transformatory movement into the idea of Christianity. And Jerome refers to the people of Ethiopia as black and clothed in the filth of sin. Also, it is used in the context of sexual perversion when the devil is depicted as an Ethiopian woman indulging in acts of sexual perversion, tempting and seducing holy Christians. So here, in the same way that the Ethiopian boy was described as misleading Christian, Ethiopian woman is also described as sexually perverted and misleading Christians. So the early Christian exegetes considered the color black and the term Ethiopians as synonyms, both of which were used as religious terms for demons, evil, sin, and carnal lust. Now, I want to look at the theoretical frameworks I used in my analysis. I used 3 theoretical frameworks. And these are taken from Edward Said's Orientalism and the concept of translation as a political act. I am a trained translator, so what I wanted to do here is to look at how the Bible, in terms of black and white, were translated into my language in Ghana. How these religious concepts were translated into the language of the people who are defined as black and associated with evil. So now let me look at Orientalism, why it is relevant to my analysis. According to Edward Said, Orientalism is the conceptual framework used by Europeans to establish ontological and epistemological differences between themselves and the Orient. It entails the creation of elaborate theories, epics, novels, social descriptions, and political accounts in relation to the Orient, its people, customs, mind, destiny, and so on. Through Orientalism, the Orient has become the distorting mirror by and through which Europe defined itself and celebrated its superiority. This framework offers an appropriate analytical tool for a critical analysis of the use of the term black and white to create ontological and epistemological differences between those categorized as black and those as white. It is relevant to the comprehension of the political, cultural, and religious institutions, theories, beliefs that work together to effectively construct and depict Africans as black and in turn reduced the cultures and humanity of Africans to the symbolisms of blackness. So I will now talk about my second theoretical framework, which is translation as a political act. Translation in this context is a transfer of knowledge from one cultural and linguistic context to another cultural and linguistic context. And this transfer is guided more often than not by a network of power relations. Power is intimately linked to knowledge, so when knowledge is being transferred by means of translations, it typically uses extremely subtle political strategies. So when we are moving knowledge from one cultural context into another, you are moving with power as well. These subtle strategies may include selecting one vocabulary over another, or placing more emphasis on certain words, ideas, and values than on others, all of which contribute to perceiving the world in a particular ways and thereby reinforcing existing stereotypes and preconceptions. For example, if I'm translating a text from, let's say, French or English to my mother tongue, I have the word for Africans, and I have the option of choosing between Black, Ethiopians, Africans. Which one am I going to choose? So this is a choice that the translator has to make. And when you make that choice, you are either perpetuating prejudice or preconception. So it depends on what words you use, on which word you put emphasis. And also I want to add, you know, the Bible is considered as a sacred text, so the words there are supposed to be moved into another language with the same semantic equivalence. You don't need to change it because these are the words of God. That's what we are made to believe anyway. My purpose here is to look at two things. First, to investigate how the black and white dichotomy and their related connotations were translated into the Ewe Bible. And second, to explore issues of sensitivity. By that I mean symbolizing black as evil, and at the same time depicting a group of people as evil and translating into their language the very concepts that is used to denigrate them. So what I'm trying to do is, it's a question of ethics. If you describe a group of people as black and you associate them with evil, what is objectionable? And you are translating these ideas into the language of the people. For me, this is an ethical issue. How do you deal with this issue? And the third and final theoretical framework I used was from Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I used his book, Decolonizing the Mind, the Politics of Language in African Literature. One theme I picked from his book is that colonial languages are embedded with concepts of European superiority and African inferiority, and European ideas, myths, and terminology destined to denigrate Africans. According to him, the main objective of decolonization is the search of a liberating perspective within which to see ourselves clearly in relation to ourselves and to other selves in the universe. So when we are talking about ourselves, we shouldn't use concepts that were imposed on us. We should use concepts that define us as who we are, as we see ourselves. We shouldn't appropriate ideas that were imposed on us. We should do a search of ourselves and come up with ideas that reflect who we are as human beings. He goes on to say, this requires rejecting and questioning the underlying assumptions behind the entire system that we have inherited and have continued to run without basic questions. So we have to question colonial languages. and question the terminologies, the ideas, and the belief system that continue to present us as a lesser human being. I used this theory to argue for the need for the abandonment of the use of the term black to depict Africans because of its objectionable nature and its effect on Africans. So I used this concept to analyze the concept black and to demonstrate that it is objectionable and its use for Africans has a negative effect on them. So now I'll look at the primary text that I used in my analysis. The first text I used is Shakespeare's Othello. First, and these are the reasons why I chose this book. First, Shakespeare's Othello embodies both the categorical and symbolic uses of black and white in the early modern English language. So this is a historical progression of my analysis. I look at classical antiquity, I look at the Middle Ages. So now I'm looking at early English language. How were these concepts used in early English language? My second reason is, whereas the term black is used as a core feature of the identity of the main character, Othello, the term white is used to construct the identity of Desdemona. I will be explaining who these two people. And finally, Shakespeare's text formed an essential part of the literature that was exported to Ghana and, for that matter, other colonial settings as a canonical text during the English colonial era. So, my analysis of this book reveals that in Othello, black is used symbolically to mean evil. For example, black vengeance, the blacker sins, and the blacker devil. So this is Shakespeare using this word symbolically. Also, black is used for human appearance in Shakespeare's Othello. For example, black is used for human appearance in Black Othello, I am black, her blackness, and other uses. In addition, black is also used figuratively to characterize Othello in the form of an animal that is descriptively black, an old black ram. Furthermore, Othello's blackness is associated with evil when Iago refers to him as the devil. Now I'll look at how is white used in Shakespeare's Othello. For example, it is used to refer to Desdemona, the whiter skin of hers than snow, and metaphorically to refer to her as a white ewe. Desdemona is associated with purity, goodness, and perfection. So this is how the symbolisms of whiteness is associated with the identity of Desdemona. For instance, she is described as so lovely and fair, and smells so sweet. Fair Desdemona, a fair woman, a fine woman, and a sweet woman. So these are the languages used to describe someone who is depicted as white. Also, the contrast between the two of them resulted in certain phenomena. Othello and Desdemona were considered incompatible and unnatural partners. For example, one of the characters referred to them as, her eyes must be fair, and what delight shall she have to look on the devil. So this person is referring to Othello as a devil and Desdemona as a pure person who shouldn't associate herself with the devil. And also their sexual relationship was described as animalistic. For example, Iago says, you will have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse. So here we are seeing the description of Othello as an animal, a Barbary horse, and the description of Desdemona as a human, your daughter. Their assumed incompatibility is brought into a sharp focus when Emilia compares Desdemona to Othello by referring to Desdemona as the more angel and Othello as the blacker devil. So here too, we see how this relationship is used to connote black and white. So in conclusion, I suggest that the belief that black is the color of evil and white the color of virtue is a theme that is systematically dramatized throughout Othello. Now I will look at how black and white are used in the Bible. Here what I did was I compared the English Bible with the Ewe Bible, that is my language, and to identify how these black and white terms and their concepts were transferred into the Ewe Bible. So what the analysis shows is that the symbolic use of black and white in English were similarly rendered in the Ewe Bible. Where black is used descriptively, it remains associated with negative connotation. So these ideas and their connotations were translated into the language of the colonized. And Ethiopian, in most cases, Ethiopian is transliterated into the Ewe Bible as Ethiopia. So the translator just used the same word in Ewe. But in one particular case, the term Ethiopian was translated into Ewe as Ameibo, which literally means a black person. So what I think happened here was that this is the case where Ethiopian and the devil were used in the same context. So in order for the translator to transfer that equivalence in meaning into the Ewe language, he or she has to maintain that semantic significance of evil in Ethiopia and translate it into the Ewe language. Because if he had translated Ethiopia, an Ewe reader wouldn't have known the relationship between skin color and evil. So the translator used a strategy of equivalence translation. You move the meaning and choose a term that communicates that meaning into the target language. Thus, the translators reproduced the biblical practice of using black as a human category and characterized those labeled black as evil. In sum, the translation of the Bible into Ewe represents the colonial insertion of a conceptual framework that implicitly depreciates on religious grounds those who are categorized as black. Now I'll look at the analysis of a Ghanaian author. So here what I want to do is I want to show how certain Ghanaian authors appropriated these ideas and used it to describe themselves, used it to write about Africans. So I chose Mensa Otabe's book, Beyond the Rivers of Ethiopia, a biblical revelation on God's purpose for the black race. I chose this book because of the striking presence of the terms Ethiopian, black, and race as key terms in the title of the book. This presupposes that the main subject matter of the book revolves around those three key terms, which, by the way, are equally central to my research project. My analysis of the book reveals that Christian religious convictions and texts have become the central organizing logic for claims and assertions about Africans in the book. The term black particularly is used extensively together with Ethiopia to refer to Africans. For instance, he points out that Moses married a black woman, and by consequence, Moses' father-in-law was an Ethiopian or black. Also, he manifests his adherence to the idea that God is responsible for the ascribed skin color of Africans. For example, he makes reference to the assertion that God predestined that you be black. So here is a writer attributing the ascription of black to Africans to a divine origin. In addition, he sees the Bible as a sacred text independent of its cultural origin. As we saw earlier, certain classical notions, ideas, and beliefs found their way into the Bible. So when he argues here that the Bible is a sacred text without cultural influence, we have evidence to show that classical cultures influenced how the Bible was constituted and the meanings and the ideas that were communicated through the idea of holy scriptures. Furthermore, despite the fact that Otabil uses the term black and Ethiopia extensively for Africans, he neglects the symbolic uses of these terms in the Bible and early Christian literature. And as a result, he overlooks the correlation between their symbolic and categorical uses. The evidence from this chapter illustrates how the use of black and Ethiopia introduced into Ghana, and for that matter Africa, through the medium of colonialism and imperialism were internalized by Ghanaians and Africans and used it to define themselves. So now I will look at the central argument of my case. Before that, because this conference is in the context of critical race theory, I want to look at questions of inequalities raised by the use of black and white to categorize humans. From an egalitarian perspective, this thesis seeks to highlight the fact that we have inherited unjust conceptual and semantic systems which derive their significance from the black and white symbolisms. I therefore point out that we cannot address effectively questions relating to oppression, marginalization, inequality, injustice, and the idea of inferiority and superiority if we do not address the semantic and conceptual systems which sustain these ideas. So what are the types of inequality raised by the use of black and white to categorize human beings? Here I talk about inequalities of recognition. The marking of Africans as black is another way of presenting them as lacking, a form of negation. The positive moral qualities possessed by those who label themselves white. In other words, labeling others as black objectifies them in a way that makes it natural and normal for them to be oppressed and marginalized. Distribution of moral values. Black and white serves as the basis for the distribution of positive and negative moral values and thereby helps to establish social relations of inequality. Uses of black and white sets normative rules. The negative and positive connotations of the concepts black and white are linked to implicit and explicit norms for how those labeled black and those white should treat each other. So here we have implicit rules. If you are called black, the way you should be treated is different from the way you should treat someone who is called white. The core egalitarian issue identified and discussed in this research are about how dominant groups use violent and derogatory language to define the otherness of those perceived to be different. This is precisely the state of existence of Africans who were and are still categorized and labeled as black, with all the attendant invidious connotations. From the perspective of critical philosophy of race, philosophers need to critique the ontological and epistemological presuppositions underpinning the use of black and white for humans and evaluate political and moral consequences of this practice. Second, the critical analysis of the concept of black in this thesis demonstrates that the supposed blackness of Africans was constructed, rationalized, legitimized, and made ostensibly natural, and in turn adopted and used rigidly to depict Africans. What I'm trying to say here is we have all accepted the term black for Africans as normal as natural. So what I'm saying here is, as critical philosophers of it, we have to critique these ideas that we have inherited. Because if you don't critique them, we continue implicitly to perpetuate the inequalities that are embedded in these concepts. So this research is questioning the ethics underpinning the use of the term black to symbolize what is evil, vice, and socially objectionable, and the use of the same invidious term to describe, homogenize, and categorize Africa. So what is the ethics of our use of that language? So this raises ethical questions for us as philosophers. This investigation into the use of the terms black and white and their respective symbolism to create different categories of human highlights how the depiction of Africans as black played a crucial role in the conception of Africans as inferior human beings, and how the conception of and depiction of Europeans as white engendered the notion of their superiority. So on this ground, I argue that the use of the terms black and white as human categorizing devices constitutes an essential part of racist conceptual and semantic systems, which concurrently employ the black and white symbolism to sustain the ideology of the superiority of those who label themselves white and the inferiority of those who are labeled black. So we should abandon the use of the term black as a description and category for Africans. This central argument is made in opposition to a hitherto dominant viewpoint which poses that the term black should rather be reclaimed and positivized by Africans and then used as a legitimate identity descriptor for them. So I look at all these movements, Black consciousness movement, the negritude movement, Black power movement, and the theory of decolonization of blackness. I argue that their objective of revalorizing the damaged humanity and cultures of African peoples is compatible with what I'm trying to say, but that we should strive to achieve this objective without using the objectionable term black, a term which has been imposed on Africans for centuries by supremacist, imperialist, racist conceptual and semantic systems. So in conclusion, I argue that so long as the symbolic use remains, the categorical use of black will be derogatory. The categorical use of black is an imposition of a definition of a subordinate group by another, the dominant group. The categorical use of black and the associated black and white dichotomy supports a privileged self-understanding of those who label themselves as white, and in turn sustain privilege and oppression. There is a moral adatum attached to the use of the terms black and white to categorize human beings, and it derives from the symbolic meanings attached to these terms. To finish, I quote Audley Moore's assertion, which echoes what I'm trying to say. According to her, Negro is a terrible word. I am opposed to black too. Neither one indicates where you come from, and both of them are used derogatorily. I thought that we should use Africans. We are African peoples. The evidence in this thesis substantiates this claims by showing how deeply and subtly the symbolisms of blackness contribute to the persistent racial stereotypes that form essential components of anti-African racism. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tsri. I shall take questions in threes. So, Ricky and then Veronique, and then Anna.
Ricky Cambridge, a once well-known analytical philosopher, has some questions to put to you. But I dare say I can't put all of them to right minute.
Please do raise your voice,
right.
Ricky.
I'm wondering whether you could tell us what the origin of the word Africa and African is, and whether those two terms don't fall in the same, between the same stools, the same argumentative project that you advanced here. And for that matter, Europe as well. That's my question, actually.
Okay, thanks. It was really interesting. It's just a question.
Remember to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Monica, just one question. You know that there were three magi, and one of the magi was black, and at the time of Christ they were not. And I just wondered, how does that image of a black king, seems quite high, sit with the idea of the early Christianity, as you see from what you showed us, that to be black was totally negative. And I just wondered whether how does that relate then to the translation of the Bible? Because when the Bible was originally, I'm not sure of the language it was in, was it Hebrew, I'm not sure. Did those negative views of black come when, say, maybe it's translated into Greek, when the Hebrews of Greeks kind of conquers? I just wondered when that all came in, and whether the understanding of the black person as being negative and evil was put in place when it was translated, or whether it was already understood, believed to be so at the time it was written.
Anna.
I take it that your ultimate conclusion is that we should stop using the term black to refer to Africans, but I suppose more than Africans, because many black people don't live in Africa, there are no Africans. But anyway, I suppose that what you're saying is we should stop using the term black to refer to people or to classify people because it is derogatory, because of all of the reasons that you've given. And I take it that that is supposed to be a reason to stop using the term because it is a wrong that we are performing when we classify somebody as black. But if that is the case, I think that there are more wrongs that are performed by classifying somebody as black. Because if I classify you as black, or I call you black, and I am, on your argument, I am undervaluing you. I am giving you a status that is somehow inferior to white people. And that is one wrong, that is the wrong that you have pointed out. But the other wrong is that I am basing your value on something that is extrinsic to you, on the color of your skin, or on whatever place of the world you come from, or some kind of contingent properties of yours. And in doing that, I think I am also devaluing you further. But in addition to that, if I do that to you, so you are black, I'm white, I'm devaluing you by classifying you as black, I am, by implication, classifying myself as white and so as superior. I am also diminishing myself by placing my own self-value on the color of my skin, on the place I come from, my ethnic background, the same extrinsic properties. So in other words, there are more reasons to, on your argument, there are more reasons to stop classifying people as black and as white. One is the one that you say, you are undervaluing me by calling me black, but the other one is, we are all undervaluing ourselves by basing our self-worth, our worth, not on our individuality, but on these external circumstances. And I didn't introduce myself in asking this question. My name is Anna Barandaya, I'm a philosopher. One of my areas is morality and ethics. And I can tell you there's no ethical theory on which it is appropriate to place the value of an individual in these external properties.
Okay, I'll start with the last question. I agree with all that you said, and I think the basic tenet of my argument, as you pointed out, is the term is derogatory. So when we use it for humans, it is difficult to prevent the embedded negatives of that term affecting the people who are labeled black. And by the way, I don't know whether Africans are actually black. You know, if you put more than one African, you see different colors. So the idea that you can homogenize a whole group of people and call them black, I think it is a misnomer. So I agree with all that you said. And other question about the translation of the Bible and the three kings. The three kings you are referring, you know, in the past the world was divided into three parts: Africa, Europe, and Asia. And all these three parts were attributed to the three kings. So the person you are referring to as black was probably being depicted to show that black was represented, or Africans were represented in the presentation of the gift to Christ. And in relation to the concept Africa, some of my analysis shows that the term Africa could mean the description of the hair of Africans, the way their hair looks. And I also came across another definition which says that word African means without frigidity. But I'm here to delve further into those two ideas. Actually, at the end of my research, these are some of the questions that I raised that we have to look at, even the term African, and establish whether the association of African with the term black has influenced the semantic content of the term African. So that is my next stage of research. So,
I mean, why should it mean positive as opposed to negative? Why should Africa mean positive as opposed to negative? Why shouldn't it also mean over its historical time? Why shouldn't it have acquired the derogation of everything you said about black?
yeah,
What's your argument for that?
That is what I'm saying. That so the point we have to investigate here is by the virtue of association, Africa could acquire the same symbolic meanings of blackness.
But wasn't there an Africa before blackness?
Yes, there was an Africa, and according to Sheikh Anta Diop, Africans were defining themselves not by the term black. They used the terms like Lebu, Kao, and they used this term to describe their geographical location. So Africans were not using color to describe themselves. The continent called African today, the people there were not using color. They were using their geographical status and geographical relationship with one another to describe themselves.
Mm. And your argument is that that meant that was positive.
Yes, when I use geography to describe myself, I don't see how one can attribute negative qualities to that geographical description. So this is me describing myself according to my environment, my geography, in the way that I understand myself, not in the way that another group of people want to see me. Yes.
So I'll take three more questions. The colleague in the maroon top, indeed, and then I guess colleague in the corner, and Brian.
Kevin Barker, I'm a legal scholar and criminologist, and I research law in post-colonial societies. and I'm from the Caribbean. So my question and comment is informed by my conditioning, arising in fact from the reclamation of this term black. I remember my grandparents talking about being called coloured, and how they found that offensive, and this was perhaps in the 1930s, 40s, before independence movement started in the Caribbean region. So I'm wondering whether your use of the term African peoples includes people of African descent in the Caribbean context, and in fact, perhaps in the wild Americas. And the other question I think might be a challenge, because I don't think you have time to give me an answer, is how is it that your thesis is actually compatible with that project of reclamation? And I'm asking that question because I remember about 10 or 15 years ago, when somebody referred to me as black in the middle of the street, off the street, and I didn't know how to react to it, because my conditioning told me, and this is from the Caribbean context, where I actually got introduced to African philosophy, is that if somebody calls you black, it might not mean anything if that person has no power to change the way you live. So I'm just wondering whether it's actually that important for us to suspend or abolish the term black and replace it with another term. In this case it might be Africa, it could be some other term, which might somehow attract the same kind of negative connotations if those kind of poor relationships remain. So I think the target perhaps needs to be somewhere else, but I can understand the argument that we have.
Kevin.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. My name is Kwaku. I'm a student of history, particularly African history. I agree with you that we should be calling ourselves Africans as opposed to black. But I have a different, there's a departure. You're looking at it from it being derogatory. I'm looking at it from the perspective of black being meaningless. In the 70s, particularly 60s, 70s, we took upon the notion of black being political, being racially, what shall I say, victimized minorities. So the Africans, the Asians, whoever was marginalized could come under the umbrella black. In the 80s, we started having fractures, black and Asian, and whatever. So it's based on that departure that I say black has become meaningless. It's only when you hear things like black on black that you know they talk about Africans. When there's Black History Month, it can be everything. So I don't agree. That's why now we say it should be African History Month. So the point about black being meaningless means we should be calling ourselves Africans. I think the lady mentioned, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, the Magi or sages. In the early days in Europe, Africans were revered. There were sages and stuff. In Europe, there are St. Maurice, for example, talking about black iconic figures, the Black Madonna and stuff. So when we're talking about Europe, which you started off with, is it binary? Black being bad, white being good, and what happened with those Africans that were revered at that time? And then you talk about the Bible, and you talk about black in a negative sense. So how are we describing Jesus and all those people? Were they not Palestinians? They will not be described as black, white, I don't think. So there's not that binary thing in terms of black and white in the Bible. Yes, they may talk about blacks and Africans, but I'm not quite sure how they describe themselves. But you being the translator, it's interesting. The Bible that I read is translated by Europeans for in English, indeed, obviously into ours. So the perspective of what people, the Palestinians or the early Christians would have described themselves would have been changed into a European context. So maybe that's what this black is supposed to be oppositional to something. I'm not sure if it's oppositional to white in the Bible, because I'm sure Jesus will not, by any stretch of imagination, be described as white. So thank you very much.
You have two very different questions, so perhaps you'd like to negotiate those two questions together before us.
So let me answer the one from this side. I think you are echoing what Du Bois and Steve Biko. I look at them in my research. In essence, what they are saying is that whether we change our name from black to Africa, the racist will still be nasty to us. So the change of name will not stop a racist person from being racist to us. But my argument to that is the project I'm undertaking is renaming ourselves, irrespective of what the racists do. The racist is there to demean you in the first place. Whatever you do, the racist will demean you. So it is upon us to use terms that we think identify us to describe ourselves. Because if we premise our argument on the other, then we are trying to please the other without trying to look at ourselves and define ourselves according to our understanding of who we are. So yes, I agree with you that when we change the name black, still racists will still target us, but that shouldn't be enough reason for us not to do anything about the term that has been imposed on us for centuries. And to answer my friend, yes, I agree with you that we should stop using the term black, and that is the core argument of my research. To your second question, yes, you are right. Some classical historians argue that the concept white couldn't be used by those who inhabited the Near East because they were pale brown. But what is interesting today is when you look at the picture or the photograph of Jesus, what do you see? Jesus is transformed into something he was not. So this is the process of whitening. As I cannot remember the author now. So he argues that the reason why Jesus was whitened was that any stain of blackness seen in him will undermine the purity of God, the purity of Jesus, and the purity of the Virgin Mary. So you are right to say that those who, the natives of the Near East couldn't describe themselves as white, but this is a colonial project or the project of imperialism to whiten Jesus to suit their agenda, to show that they are like God, to show that they are like the person who created the world, and that person is on their side.
I think at this point, given that it is 7:30, we have a reception to go to, we might well continue this discussion over wine. This discussion, I think, really does need to be continued because I don't know if you read The Guardian, but one of our colleagues who was here earlier today, Dr. William Acker at Birkbeck College, published an article in The Guardian 2 weeks ago entitled "British Universities Need Black Studies." There is a major movement in this country for black studies, but engaging with what black studies might mean, given Dr. Tsri's arguments, I think is going to be a very important part of the critical philosophy of race in Britain.